Well, good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock and that's the scheduled starting time for our meeting. So welcome to everyone that's currently here with us. I'd like to welcome them all. I'm Peter Bacon, your MC. If you didn't know, you should have all got an email advising you of that. We have our guest speaker speaking first, but a few reminders. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded, goes out onto the World Wide Web. So I've told you before, if you want to hide yourself, you'd better turn your camera off. Don't forget to mute yourself. Some people tend to forget and someone comes in the room and says something to them and it also goes out over the World Wide Web. So that's sometimes not the best of things to do. So I'll just introduce our speaker tonight is Mark O'Reilly. Mark is the director of Austbrokers Countrywide and has 30 years experience in the insurance industry. Mark's specialisation includes managing complex insurance claims, and he has represented many large firms at director and board level to resolve complex disputes with insurers. Mark has qualifications in risk management, occupational health and safety, and insurance. And prior to joining Austbrokers Countrywide, he worked for a multinational brokerage in Melbourne as well as in Brisbane. Austbrokers Countrywide are a specialist insurance broking business based in Scoresby, Melbourne, with a number of dedicated divisions that focus on cyber, directors and officers risks, professional engineering, manufacturing and logistic risks. Now, Mark is going to speak to us, but Mark says that preferably if you have any questions, just either raise your hand and we'll try and pick you up, or turn your mic off, and when Mark takes a breath, ask the question. He prefers that questions on the run, or you can type them into chat and Hugh and I will try and keep our eye on that and we'll be able to ask Mark the question for you. So over to you, Mark.
Great. I'll just click on share screen and off we go. So we tested this a couple of minutes ago and it worked. So I'm assuming you can all now see my screen. Is that right? Just checking.
That's correct.
Yep.
All right. Good. All right. So what I want to talk about is, first of all, the risks in relation to cyber. And I think you guys will probably be more informed than most people that I speak to about that. And then the end game is, what can you do to protect yourself and what insurance is there about? So I'm going to skim over the first part. There's a lot of information in the slides deliberately, so it was set up as a slide pack so where you guys can have that information. But I'm not going to read basically everything from the slide. That's more for your information for a later point. So what I want to do is really start off and talk about what does cybercrime look like, and I think you guys will be pretty well au fait with that. But we start off in a traditional sense, where basically someone's trying to steal your money or your identity or try and do some form of impersonation. So anything to do with an electronic means is effectively grouped into what we now know as cyber. So electronic risk has been around for a long time. The very first paper I wrote on cybercrime was back in 2012. And the industry's changed a lot since then. The insurance protection has changed a lot, and it's going to change even more so in the next couple of years. So areas of risk basically are anything to do with electronics, and particularly at the moment it's phone hacking by way of text to try and get you to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do. So that part I think you guys will all pretty much know, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. What I want to touch on is how they can sort of get in. I think you guys will be pretty well au fait with this as well, but what we see in our business is a cyber crime of some sort almost every single day across our clients. We've got about 12,000 clients, most of which don't bother to buy cyber insurance and are probably not as aware as they could be in relation to their online presence and their online risk. So what we try to do is talk to them and then train our staff to talk to people about how to try and, first of all, recognise and be more security aware, because prevention is much better than the cure. And insurance only comes in as a cure, but insurance is never a cover-all. You're much better to have preventative measures in place. So first of all, the impersonation risk, and you can see a couple of different ways that my email is spelt there, that unless you're really au fait with looking very closely at a particular email, you can effectively be conned, because someone like me who talks tonight might then send you a follow-up email and you're conned into clicking on something you wouldn't ordinarily do. So the impersonation risk is where a lot of it starts from. So what insurers and what I suppose the level of recommendations are to try and avoid that in businesses and in private, because it's effectively the same level of risk, is anytime you're transacting by way of a financial transaction online, try to have a mechanism where you can check and verify the data where you're transferring money or where you're asked to transfer money. Use a point of multi-factor authentication, and most banking systems and credit card systems have that on your phones as well as electronic. That basically you'll go to put in a vendor password, it pings on your phone, and then it verifies that it's actually you. So if you end up being impersonated, you have that secondary measure, secondary step to stop someone getting access to your details. So dual signatories in a very paper-driven business, multi-factor authentication in everything to do with that electronics, and then in a business sense, some form of vendor approval process. So you actually know who you're dealing with, and you don't just get an email from someone saying, pay this, do that, and you make almost, I suppose, an educated guess that it's about right. We got some details about that. But what we generally find is people will watch and hack at a precise moment in time, and they'll know what's coming in or what's going on, and they'll use that sense of manipulation to try and get you to do something. So anytime you go to make a payment, it can be as simple as I got a bill the other day for a guy who just did a very small bit of landscaping. He sent through the bill. In a personal sense, you just ring that person. I'm just checking the bank details, and they read it out to you and you just go, yeah, that's exactly what I've got, and you make the payment. It's that extra step, and that takes generally about 60 seconds, that is there as a protection measure to avoid the cure of having to try and worry about it. So the more protections you can have, the better you're going to be. So that just goes into basically a level that a lot of our clients do, particularly in the legal and real estate sectors, what they put on their emails. And they basically put a couple of examples there that I've given there. Warning, due to increase in cybercrime, on it goes. This is the way we're going to process your payment. So it sets the agenda right from the start, and then people go through and verify details in person to, I suppose, save that sense of electronic fraud. There's another example there. Due to increase in fraudulent activities in this industry, we do not provide our account details via email. And that type of mechanism in a business or a private sense is a great way to do it, because in the one-off transaction, if you can do it in person, you're generally going to save yourself to protect it. Another example there, they basically say the same thing. You should not transfer funds to any third party without first obtaining verification. So the idea being is, first of all, it's there to protect yourself, but then secondary to that, if someone purports to getting an email from you and it's not, because they've basically manipulated information, you get effectively scammed because the person on the other end of the transaction believes it was you. So they contact you and go, what's going on? And they're very flustered. So you need a sense of being able to delegate the responsibility away from yourself and saying, well, I told you this is how we do it. It was in our emails. So you're basically trying to protect yourself first, as well as building a defense mechanism behind that. So that's why these warnings are very common these days in a lot of businesses that do a lot of electronic funds. So what I then sort of led to is, where's people liable in this type of environment? And if you don't necessarily have the right level of protections, and someone in that transaction, no matter which side of the transaction you're on, if someone makes an allegation against them, you did this, you ought to do this, and you get caught up in a transaction, so you can be at the wrong end where someone can steal your money, or you can be at the other end where someone is alleging that you were manipulated and you took the money, but someone was impersonating you. So there's a sense of liability across that whole scheme that really has to be unbundled. So what you've got to try and do is, first of all, mitigate your own level of risk, create a level of separation from yourself, away from it, and then try to establish where's the consumer behaviours going, how can we try and deal with that. And then, excuse me, there's a whole lot of reporting processes that come in right at the very end, and that's where insurance sort of kicks in relation to the mandated reporting, particularly in a business sense, where you got to go and tell certain parties, and it's got to be done in a very precise time frame. Otherwise, you're subject to fines and penalties that sit outside of that. So in a normal sense, and I'll touch on that in a minute, the fines and penalties is a big exposure. Normally, fines and penalties are not considered insurable, but in the cyberspace they are. And that's one of the key parts to it, that first of all, there's a monitoring and protection level, and then there's the recovery process that the insurance tries to take care of. So what I wanted to then touch on is cyber insurance is very different to what is a normal insurance product. Insurance in a physical sense, you insure your assets, something goes wrong like the earthquakes a week or so ago, you have damage, the insurance is there to protect you financially as a result of the event that's occurred. Cyber insurance works very differently. It's there to provide, first of all, a monitoring and level of protection, as well as a best response of how to get yourself out of it by way of the recovery. So prevent the hacking, but then if you are hacked, help you develop basically a response, get a number of experts around you to try and track and locate the penetration, and then avoid that occurring again. So it's not a multitude of hits all the time. So the whole premise of cyber insurance is very different to what everything else has been understood for 250 years of what insurance is there to do. So the investigation process, which from day one you report it, they bring experts in, they help investigate it, they find it, they'll potentially pay the ransom for you to get the data back, and therefore the whole stream goes right from day one, which is very different to what a traditional, say, home insurance would be. So what I've just tried to outline there is there's 8 bullet points of what a cyber insurance program should look like, be it business or private, and I'll touch on that right at the very end. But a lot of cyber insurance is currently viewed as a business risk, but what we're now seeing in the personal space of people being at home, particularly work from home at the moment, the business may not necessarily cover the individual actions. And if you're doing things on your home computer, no matter what it is, you've got basically a personal exposure. And where we would rate that exposure is you're likely to make a home insurance claim once every 20 years. You're likely to make a motor vehicle insurance claim once every 8 years. You're likely to have a cyber issue at least once a month, just by the way the data tells us. So it's the protection mechanisms of those penetrations that are effectively randomized, but everyone gets them all the time. We've traditionally just known it as spam, but the level of cyber threat that is now coming through in the personal space is much greater than any other traditional insurance that you would purchase. So the whole idea of that, and you've all probably just skimmed them, but the 24/7 hotline to try and deal with a problem, to save it being a multitude of risk. Therefore, the forensics, the legal advice, the consultancy side of how we're going to get you out of this. So first of all, we're going to identify it, fix it, capture it, stop it from occurring, and then off we go from there. So a lot of the reporting mechanisms are automatically built into it, which 12 years ago, the way the cyber insurance started to develop was basically about the fines and penalties that if your data was breached and you've got a privacy issue, you then have to have a long-term monitoring of all of their data, and you get a very big fine. Some of those fines out of the US have been in the hundreds of millions. So the whole idea of where it started versus the current level of protection are vastly different. And we see the cost changing with that as more people become aware, more people will start being exposed. So depending on what level of exposure you got, it can be as little as, say, $1,000, or it could be $50,000 in a personal space, which is it's basically going to be a life-changing risk. And when you're exposed to that effectively once a month, it's the mechanisms behind it that protect you, which will mean that you're not the one, and they'll move on to someone else. So some things to look forward to, because all insurance is not the same. And that's one of the most important parts. If I said to you guys, I want a quote for this, whatever that may be, then someone will give you a quote. Then price is not, I suppose, the key attribute. It's what are you actually buying in the transaction? Where's the level of coverage, protection? Where's the features and benefits? So if I wanted to buy a Holden, well, I'm buying a Holden. If I wanted to buy a Mercedes, I'm getting more features and benefits. And the same applies to insurance across all spectrums, but particularly with cyber. When we look at, if you just want a quote, you get a quote and people go straight to price. But what you've got to look for is some of these things here that we were talking about. In social engineering is basically a term you guys will probably all be familiar with, but that's effectively impersonation fraud, if someone tries to steal your money. A number of the cyber insurance covers don't actually include that, because that's the biggest area of risk. So some insurers put it in as an option or an extension. We think it's mandated and you need to have it, but you need to understand what you're buying. Certain things are sub-limited. So you think you're buying a $1 million cover, but you might only have 25,000, which we see in some covers, which is a bit of a problem. We then got to go through and check the conditions. So when I'm reading any sort of document, I go straight to the carve-outs or the exclusions to try and then better understand it, because if you know what's intended not to be part of it, so the features and benefits, what's not there, versus what actually is covered, which is normally in very broad, loose language, and it reads as if it's covering a whole lot of things. So if you go straight to the exclusions, you read things in the reverse, you have a much better understanding. And then straight away just go, why is that? I didn't realize, you should have told me. And then we get this level of lack of understanding, but people didn't necessarily understand what they were buying to start with. So check the sublimits, read the exclusions first, and then go back and read the rest of the coverage. And then simply put, for people like me, who's a broker, the best question a client can ever ask me is, well, what's the difference? So then our job is to say, here's the differences. If this one has this one has this is why you're buying. And then you start to understand the difference between the Holden and the Mercedes. Some of those features you may not want or you may not require, but at least you have that process of understanding. So always try and ask, well, what's the difference? How does that compare? Those sort of questions help you delve into a little bit beyond the price. So there's one particular insurer that mandates that you have a password change every 45 days. And if you don't, you get no cover. So as a business or as a private citizen, how many people go through and automatically change their password every 45 days? And the answer is most don't. So the coverage itself, when you delve into it, is actually quite basic. So some of those things you've got to try and flush out when you're trying to purchase a level of protection. Well, I touched on it before, the failure to verify Payees details. So someone sends me an invoice for a very small bit of landscaping. I just paid it, fraud, because there was a level of the invoice was interpreted at some point, the BSBs was changed, the money goes, I never get the money back and I've got no cover because of that particular exclusion. So as with any form of protection, we always go straight to the devil in the detail. And that's why I just wanted to highlight those couple of bullet points for you to help you understand what you should be looking for. So the next part I want to talk about, because I deliberately didn't want to talk too long, I want to leave a fair bit of time for questions, is there's one insurer called Emergence. I'll deliberately say their name. If you are relying on your home insurance to protect you relative to cyber insurance, you're not going to get any coverage. The home insurance is there as a physical asset level of protection. It's not going to provide any form of protection in relation to the electronic threat. So the theory being is, for those that felt that electronic risk was greater, a business can go and buy cyber insurance, and that's fantastic. But in a personal space, even that business insurance generally won't cover you because you're doing personal transactions. And there's one insurer called Emergence who's just released a product. The product is deliberately dumbed down to versus what you would buy in a business sense, but at least offers you some level of cover and protection. So that's something that you could look to try and understand. But what I first of all want you to do is make sure you're protecting yourself and understanding the cyber framework and the cyber risk, because protection is much better than trying to get insurance, because there's so many pitfalls relative to insurance. So I only wanted to talk for about 20 minutes, and I've sort of skipped over a few things, So I can go back and refresh if anyone has any questions, or I can delve into more sense of detail in relation to what some of those insurance considerations would be in the personal space or in a business space. And some of you, if you're consulting, but you're effectively working from home, there's a business avenue to that versus a personal avenue. And those two at the moment don't quite meet. So if you're trading as a business, doing activities as a business, that links to a very different type of protection. So the purpose was to, first of all, make you more aware. I think you guys as a group are probably more aware than most. One of the biggest cyber claims that we've been involved with was about $7 million. They haven't got the money back, but the insurance was there to basically rebuild all of the servers and protect, I suppose, a level of exposure going forward. And the insurance paid a whole lot of ransomware type activities to get the data back so they could reboot their systems. And this business had quite a lot of people. I won't go into the details, but if you're losing $7 million and you're down, they're actually down for a couple of weeks while the whole process was involved. So even though that business had their own IT people who were deemed experts, this type of coverage was intended to sit alongside that deliberate digital response to protect them and provide other services with a level of immediacy so that business could cope and recover, versus a lot of other businesses, sometimes you don't even recognise the level of threat until you've been exposed, and you may have been exposed incrementally over a period of weeks. So what I'll do is I'll just stop sharing for a second. And then that was, I suppose, the quick introductory that I wanted to cover off. So I'll pause in case anyone's got any questions. George?
George?
Yes.
Quite recently, in the last week, a close friend of mine is a home user, reasonably knowledgeable and very cautious. He had an old Garmin GPS, quite old, and wanted to update it. And it didn't work, so he put in Garmin update into the search engine and clicked on something that says Garmin help and contact them. There was a phone number, local phone number, and they applied. You know, we're from Garmin. What do you want? He explained. They said, we can fix it. We need a remote session. And it started well. And then the guy said, you've got about 5 or 6 nasties. You're infected by this and this and this and this. And he had Kaspersky going. He was a bit surprised. So many people, so many things could have got Kaspersky. Anyway, they said, we'll fix it. You don't have to watch. We'll do it. But he took some photos of what they're doing. And then he said, well, look, we can cover you for 3 years, 1 to 3 years. And he said, well, look, I'll take the 3-year one. And he said, that's $390, please. He said, what? No, I'll take 1 year, which is $150. They said, look, before I transfer the money, I'd like to just check my Garmin. He said, certainly, sir. Checked the Garmin and it worked. All the updates worked. It was completely up to date. So he paid. He was still suspicious. He rang the phone number and I'll just stop now. It was a scam. He was scammed. I checked his computer, there was nothing there. And because he didn't go to the Garmin site, he went to the Garmin help site. And the people said, we're here from Garmin, sounded knowledgeable, fixed the problem. What sort of recourse does he have, having voluntarily paid the money?
The intent being he was defrauded. So if you use that type of information, yes, he willfully did it. Yes, he willfully gave them the details, but ultimately he was tricked. So,
but they fixed the main problem that he rang about.
What you end up having is that spoofing website to start with. So they've spoofed the website. They've then basically read through a script, and what they try to do is create a sense of urgency. So it starts off with the problem, and then they flip. So there's a number of ATO scams. There's a Telstra scam going on at the moment, where they basically say, this is infected, you need to do this. So what starts off as a Garmin query very subtly turned into Garmin wouldn't ever talk to you about a cyber threat on your computer and say you've got all these problems. They would stick straight to Garmin and Garmin only. So it's easy in hindsight, but effectively you're tricked into giving away your sensitive data, whatever the data may be. So be that financial data, be that once they get access to your system, they can go and implant various things. So even though the transaction might have been 150, if you've given them access to your system, they might all of a sudden have malware in there. They can go and copy various things, and they can go into your internet banking and hit you again and again and again. So in that scenario, under a cyber insurance product, we would refer to that as social engineering in a broad sense. Social engineering just means you're tricked. So there would have been a mechanism at $150, you probably wouldn't bother about claiming it as an insurable event. But if it was in the thousands or even tens of thousands, then you would. So generally what happens is, first and foremost, the question, would it have been covered if they had bought the right insurance cover? Yes, it would have. Yes, they got tricked, and yes, they probably feel stupid. So a lot of people don't actually admit it because they think, oh, I should have known better. That was really dumb. I feel stupid. So you have to get through the psychology of the way they play that game. They deliberately script it to create a sense of urgency and get you to do something, and it has to be done now, and here's your vulnerability. So you act straight away. So they know that. They're very good in the psychology sense. And yes, there would have been insurance protection if it was a large sum of money.
Thank you.
Mark, could I ask a simple question? I've got my house insured. I've got my contents insured. Are you advocating or suggesting that maybe I should have cyber insurance as well?
Yes and no is the short answer. I don't necessarily want to sell insurance because I don't think that's the game that I'm in. I'm more in the game of advice. So if people protect themselves and understand the vulnerability and understand these tricks that go on, they're better protected, and then they don't necessarily need insurance. But I think what's going to happen across the broader spectrum of people that have always bought home insurance for the never because it's a big sum of money if you lose your house, but it's potentially life-changing, and for a relatively small amount of money, there is a level of insurance protection that is evolving in the personal space. It evolved for about, let's say, 9 years across the business space, and those covers are now becoming quite robust. But the price of that insurance, whilst it used to be relatively cheap, it's effectively doubled in the last 2 years. So even that cost for business is going up because they foresee the threat. In the personal space, it's going to be exactly that cycle, because the personal space, the threat is so great that people will start to consider that threat and start to look towards how they can protect themselves. So you'll buy McAfee or Kaspersky or various things around it, but you might also look to other forms of protections which your home insurance just will not do. It's not designed to do that. And you may look at a cover like Emergence. Feel free, Google it and look it up for yourself rather than me try and talk it through. But that's why I'm telling you who they are that do it, because that offer that they've now got, forgetting the price scales, because I know I don't need to talk you through that, but the price scale starts at about $100. So it's relatively cheap. The cover is relatively basic. And the way we would foresee the industry going is you'd buy your McAfee and you would also buy the cyber insurance. You would dovetail those two together as a way of protecting yourself. So protect yourself up front, but then the what if happens, what are you going to do? You then call this hotline because you've automatically bought that piece of paper and you bought it electronically, and then that gives you the level of protection. So someone will come into your system, they'll fix it, they'll identify the threat, and they'll help you protect yourself going forward. That's where I see not necessarily the insurance industry, but that's where I see the world of protection going.
The reason I ask is a friend of mine, she was on her computer. She doesn't know what she did, but they somehow got into it and they took $10,000 out.
Yep.
And she's perplexed. So she's taken a computer to get it checked and cleaned, but she doesn't know how they did it. I'm just looking that would the insurance cover that sort of thing? Yes,
is the short answer. It's always much more complex as to what happened and how it happened. And we go through a process to try and identify that. But the purpose or the intent, if you buy the right level of insurance, is to give you a level of protection for being tricked. Insurance traditionally will never pay if I did that willfully, I gave them my details, and everyone just assumes that's not covered. But the way cyber insurance is developing is that level of trickery is the key level of risk, and that's what the insurance is there to protect you for.
Okay, so like if I run my car into a lamppost and I'm just a single driver, my insurance company pays for it. I'd probably pay a higher premium next year. And so this would be the same if I've done something stupid and it's cost me money cyber-wise, the insurance would cover that.
Correct.
They mightn't be too happy next year, but...
Yeah, but the whole idea is once bitten, twice shy. And everyone probably on this screen could tell a story of someone they know where they were tricked into doing some form of transaction, or they saw the spoof come through, like the Garmin example. Well, there's ATO calls, there's Telstra ones, there's energy ones going on around at the minute. They're all trying to do the same thing, and that level of trickery, depending on how busy where your mind is, you're not necessarily going to be 100% focused. And they just play a numbers game that they'll go through a process. They'll go through 1,000 people, and they only get to get one. So the vulnerability is much greater in that space, and therefore that's what the insurance is there to try and protect against. So your motor vehicle example, you do something stupid, but it's still, I didn't mean to do it. I was tricked to doing it, and that's where the insurance comes in to help you with in the end. The personal insurance has a much lower limit, much lower level of protection than a business cover would, or a private consultancy would have, but it's still something, and something is better than nothing. And that's where we see that evolution of people being more aware of these things.
Peter Carpenter's got a question. Peter?
Good, that was quick. Yes, thanks, Mike. MelbPC has at the moment, we have a discussion forum site on Microsoft's cloud, a product they call Yammer, which is essentially a free-for-all open discussion forum. There's been a court case recently in the High Court that wound its way all back down the pipeline to the originating site on maybe on Facebook or something like that. And it was found that Facebook wasn't liable, but the originating site, it might have been one of the large media groups, was liable. Now, I'm wondering how liable we could be on this discussion forum if someone said something that someone took offense to. Could we be jointly and severably liable, given that we're a commercial organisation, albeit non-profit?
The short answer is yes, you could. And whilst we probably haven't delved into that side because that's slightly different, but if you wanted a review, because I know Kristen from a former life, we've known each other for a very long time, and that's how I came to, I suppose, talk to you today. So I basically, for my day job, I specialise in doing reviews for people and tell them what they've got and what they don't have, and here's your gap in the middle, and here's what you need to go away and fix. A lot of that work, depending on who it is, we do for free, for not-for-profits, because we think our view of experience should be provided for not-for-profits for free, because the whole idea is to go and help them to start with, and then we make our money in the end, just by the way the world goes around. So what you're really looking at is more on what's known as a professional indemnity style exposure, that the business itself has done something, represented something that wasn't right. And in a lot of that, it can be libel, slander, or it can be simple misstatement of truth, which has a flow-on effect and impacts somebody else potentially financially. So there's a whole realm of risk that sit with that. And as a group, you need to, yes, be aware of the risk and have a sense of monitoring of what you're publishing and how you're putting it through. And then what you generally do is you would have warnings that Mark O'Reilly's individual statements do not represent the business. So you're trying to distance yourself with it. But in the end, you get grouped into it, depending what is said, how it's said. It's probably a very low risk, but it's still a risk to be mindful of. And there would be a level of insurance that the group may already have or could look at to protect themselves. But by the nature of your group, it's probably a very low risk, therefore it's probably a low cost.
Regarding Yammer, that's only available to members. It's not a public forum. Does that make a difference?
There's many, I suppose, mechanisms such as Yammer and various other things, and even Facebook as a more broader example, that I can go on and publish something on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, etc. I'm deemed to be the publisher. Whilst there's been a lot of cases fairly recently where they're trying to change that and change the media landscape, but me as the publisher is ultimately liable for what I publish, and I'm only using that forum to publish. So me as the producer of the content is liable. There's been a number of personal liabilities that have gone through that process where someone sees something, takes it out of context, and effectively starts shaming someone publicly on Facebook or various things. And it turns out that they were wrong. They didn't understand the context with which they saw, and they basically hit the keyboard too fast and effectively vilified someone else. That person sues the individual, and then they go, okay, first of all, you've got to apologise, then what's the financial loss? How's all that going to play out? Because you can effectively financially ruin someone in a matter of minutes if they are a celebrity or if they are a high net worth individual who's reliant on their persona on a Facebook type environment. So it always comes back to the publisher. The publisher is liable for the content that they put forward, and it's deliberately intended for the publisher to go and check and verify the information, otherwise they expose themselves.
Alan Wiseman has a question for you, Mark, and then you, Dave.
Yes, you've differentiated between personal and business insurance. Where does running your own self-managed super fund fit? Which side of the fence?
The intent of a super fund is it's a business. So the self-managed super fund, deliberately with its own, I suppose, rules and mechanisms, is intended, just by financial structure, it's intended to be different to Mark O'Reilly as an individual person. So Mark O'Reilly versus Mark O'Reilly Proprietary Limited as trustee for the Mark O'Reilly Superannuation Fund, that creates a sense of business distinction. So whilst a lot of people have a self-managed super fund, the fund itself and the activities of the fund represent a business, and therefore you can apply the broader business risk to the activities of what the trustee for the trust is undertaking. Super funds are generally a very low risk relative to a lot of internet exposures by way of publications, but it becomes a very high risk with a cyber threat. People can steal money effectively. So the transactions in relation to a self-managed super fund are a key exposure. You've got to deliberately verify the details and slow down, make sure you do it right. Depending what the trading mechanism is behind it and how the trust is set up, etc. We won't get into superannuation fund rules for the minute, but you're spot on to raise that, because the financial exposure is quite great if you're not dealing with more of a, I suppose, an understanding of a platform or a trading. If you want to trade yourself, you'll probably trade via a ComSec or something like that. So assuming that you're working through the major banks or a platform, if you want to have a very different type of super fund, there is a financial risk associated with that of you effectively being defrauded.
Thank you.
A question, actually, you're talking about the personal people in terms of the cover there, Mark. How common is it amongst the general population?
Can you probably rephrase it? I don't think I really understood your question.
Well, you're saying you can take out the personal cover for the risk. My question was, how general is it across the general population? Is it 1 in 1,000, 10% population? What kind of?
We're talking how many people take out cyber insurance?
Yes.
Okay. So let's give you an example. Let's say about 85% of Australians take out motor vehicle insurance. About 75% of Australians take out a form of home insurance, forgetting whether it's adequate or not. All right. So that's what's, I suppose, bred into us. We do those things. We protect those level of assets. In cyber, it's less than, in a personal space, it's about 1%. In a business space, it's under 10% of businesses that go and buy what's known as a cyber insurance. They'll automatically say, yes, they've got a level of protections, but my own view is they're probably not aware or sensitive enough to where those risks sit. And in the conversations that they have about insurance, they're probably not attuned to that level of risk and therefore don't buy it. So it's exceptionally low across the whole value.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you go, Peter.
If a business wishes to take out cyber insurance, would the insurance company look at whether they have a IT security organisation behind them?
Yes and no. Because a lot of insurance is commoditised, that creates the problem in itself that what we would prefer to do, and we would much rather go, what are you doing, how are you doing it, where's the vulnerabilities, what's the penetration tests, all those things that you would ordinarily do. And then we put that as a package to the insurer. The insurer looks at the risk and goes, you're better than them, so I'll give you a price difference or I'll give you a better cover. Just by the way a lot of those transactions work, generally it's a fill in a form, tick and flick, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And the forms itself were deliberately designed as a checklist, as a reminder that you need to have these basic things. But they started off probably at a very basic level to allow people to transact. So we had a sense of apathy that people weren't even buying it. So the ability to go and purchase something, to first of all be aware of the risk, that entry level covers ask for very little, but then the better covers ask for more and more because they want to protect you more. So there's a scaled approach to that. At a cost wise, it used to be the entry price was about $600. It's now about $1,500. But the ability to go and transact and purchase that type of insurance, whilst I do it all the time, so I'm used to the forms, but it's like a one pager, 10 questions, that's all they ask. It's not necessarily aimed, in my view, as risk protection because they're just trying to go to the minimum level to develop a price. And then there's a whole range of other things that need to be overlaid with that about protections that the insurers often don't ask, depending which insurer you're working with.
Mark? Anyone else?
Peter, Ron Brooks has his hand up.
Ron Brooks?
Yeah. This might not cover things like hacking and hacking your identity, but about 10 years ago, because I was doing a job and getting paid from Africa, I talked to my bank and said, what do I do to make sure that, you know, when money possibly comes in, they might not actually filter money back out again. And they said, look, just start a new bank account, which actually was free. And from then on, over the last 10 years, if I'm ever paying anything out, ever, I mean, not just overseas, but even locally, I transfer that amount of money into this one bank account, then pay from that bank account. So the bank account goes back to zero. And then, you know, so if anybody then was to get into that bank account, they couldn't take any more money out because there's nothing there.
It's a very good point. And the way the banking system works, you'll often find that you'll have an internet platform and then your accounts are effectively linked. So what you're talking about is an unlinked position, which is great. Good level of protection to go and put it to zero. You deliberately don't have an overdraft on it. And then that allows a higher level of monitoring. So that becomes a bit of a key feature. It's a higher level of administration. And we're always trying to, in a business sense, remove the level of administration to make things more efficient. But what you've just outlined is a great system and a much higher level of protection. Because even if they do get through the step 1, step 2 level of protections, they're going to bypass you because there's nothing there, as long as those accounts are not linked in the background or there's another mechanism in behind it. So even things like saving passwords on your systems, once they can get in, if your password automatically pops up, that creates a problem in itself without that 2-factor authentication. So it's a very good point you've just made, Ron.
Yeah, I mean, I regularly send money to Dubai because I've got family in Dubai. Regularly, and you know, this gives me a level of relief sort of thing that it's a little bit safer. Nothing's ever safe, but it's just a bit safer.
Yeah, a little bit safer is the right rule. make yourself a little bit safer all the time, and that's the best avenue. I think we're going to go to Dave. You had another question, was that right? Was it Alan? You might have had another question. Yep, Alan.
Yes, so you mentioned McAfee, and George, I think, mentioned Kaspersky. Does the antivirus software that you're running play a part in any of those things?
Yes, it does. And if we treat them all the same effectively, because they'll all advertise they're doing exactly the same thing. So there's various features across all of them. One of the mandated requirements is if you've got a completely vulnerable system, you're never going to get insurance. So you've got to have a minimum level of protections, and you've got to have a form of, I suppose, a current account with a McAfee or Kaspersky or whoever it is. So that's one of the minimum levels of a requirement to have a level of protection, and then it goes on from there and scales up. So you're good to raise that. You still have to have something running in the background. If you're completely vulnerable, insurance is never going to pay.
Thank you.
That raises the question for me then. You mentioned an account. I better mention that the MelbPC is quite happy to recommend Microsoft Defender, which comes with Windows 10 or 11. So I have that. I don't have an account. Would that be acceptable?
Yes, it is. You go to the parameters of what those programs are intended to do, and Microsoft is one of the biggest organizations going around. They're obviously one of the biggest threats, and you hear about the threats and vulnerabilities all the time across Microsoft and others. But the team that Microsoft and those very large conglomerates have in behind it to even protect themselves, and then convert that into a product to protect their customers, because the reputational risk is just so great that if Microsoft gets hacked and their tens or hundreds of millions of consumers are all hacked, Microsoft is dead as a business in one day. So you could imagine that level of vulnerability, that level of threat that Microsoft have been going to protect themselves. So Microsoft Defender and other mechanisms behind that, we group them all the same because there's a level of vulnerability for those large corporates that they would usually spend more to protect more, because the threat level is so great and the reputational risk that they want to save themselves from is just so enormous.
Peter, Kirsten has a question.
Kirsten.
Yes, it's great, Peter, that you're getting people to put their hands up. That's wonderful. My question, Mark, is about deep fakes, and how worried are you about deep fakes and just the level of how complex things are getting in the future?
Extremely worried. And if you go back, not even, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago, you could sometimes, and almost most of the time, spot the level of penetration that was coming through, that it was a crap email, was spelt wrong. It had just a whole lot of context that was just clearly wrong. And particularly the scattergun effect, trying to go a whole world approach, because if they send an email to 100,000 people, they only need one bite. The level of sophistication that is coming because the technology is getting so great. You look at a curve effect, that what starts off as a very slow ramp, it gets better and better and better, and then basically we're going straight north. The threat level will only increase, and it will increase exponentially. So we as consumers, the threat, it's not a case of if you're going to get hit, it's a case of when and how you can protect yourself a little bit better than the next person on the database that they hit. So it's our view that the risk will be so great that we won't even have a mechanism to protect ourselves. It's trying to be ahead of that curve and keep some protections going so that you're not the one being vulnerable.
So what worries me are voice faking and video faking.
Yep.
Yeah.
If we take that example that we talked about with Garmin, they had a hotline, we rang the hotline, but that could be someone like me that you're calling. They've recorded my voice 20 times. They manipulate my voice. You think you're calling me, but you're actually calling a computer. The computer then recognizes that and knows exactly what phrases you're going to say. So when I'm sending an email or when I'm talking to people, I try to effectively dumb it down so people know it's me, and you sort of drop a bit of the corporate speak a lot of the time. So people naturally know and warm and gravitate to the person, and that avoids that deep fake type of scenario. I see that coming as a threat. I'm not seeing how we can necessarily protect ourselves from that, but the technology, the Tom Cruise example of the video that went out, that was around the start of this year, where it actually beat a lot of the facial recognition computing. That was one that everyone sort of sat up and took notice about and just went, okay, well, technology is better than everyone thinks. So that level of spoofing will continue to get better and better. It's how we can be aware and less vulnerable to that.
Richard Bradford.
Yeah, there was comment before about purchasing things over the internet using a bank account. Is it better protection to use a credit card rather than a bank account or a debit card? Because it's the bank's money, not your money. You've got the better consumer protection against transactions that go wrong if you use a credit card.
The short answer to that, whilst it's a technical answer, the short answer is yes. Because if you're using a credit card and then you lodge a case with your bank, the bank will basically try and claw the money straight back. So if you're using a credit card, there's a mechanism in place because you're relying on the bank's money, and you can say, no, that's an unauthorised transaction. They lodge a case, and sometimes it takes a long time to get the money back. Sometimes the banks will identify the fraud and make you aware of it. So that traditional EFT where you're spending your own money, or the self-managed super fund where you'd be spending your own money versus a credit card, in theory, there's a better level of protection in place because the bank sits in the middle of that transaction and you have a mechanism to claw it back. Similar to PayPal as another example, there's mechanisms where you can go and claw that back.
Philip.
Thank you. That's it. Look, this is probably a little bit out of scope of your general risk management comments, but my rant is about the way I believe we Australians have been let down by our banks. Numbers are fairly cheap, and I can't see why my bank won't issue me multiple credit card numbers all linked to my main card that I can restrict the payee and the amount, so that if someone does grab my credit card, they can't start using it if they're not the correct payee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It happens in the US, it doesn't happen in Oz, and I think that's just a real letdown by the banks. The other part of my rant is invoices through emails. I try never to accept an invoice through emails. I like what the banks, my bank has done at least. I can register regular invoices with them. They are submitted to the bank. The bank has verified that the invoice is correct, and I pay it at my leisure. I think these sorts of things should be embraced more in Oz, but they don't seem to be.
I'll tackle, as a personal example, your second one about invoices. We send about 14,000 invoices a year. About 12,000 of those are sent electronically. So it's unfortunately, I agree with you, and I wish we had better mechanisms, but the level of efficiency that we need to work towards means that businesses like us and a lot of other businesses, that I get all my energy bills, I get my phone bill, I get my insurance bills, I get everything just done electronically, and that's probably a mechanism of the world in which we live in. And our business was forced to go down that path. As a gateway to that, the transaction itself was protected, and we bank with the NAB, but the transaction platform was actually provided by the NAB to provide a sense of security to that. And the way the NAB operates, and a lot of banks are the same, so I'm not sort of spooking them at all, but they actually give businesses like us that mechanism, and they give a lot of phone companies and energy companies that mechanism, where basically it's an individual account number per client. Each time an invoice is produced, it goes straight to the NAB system, which provides, in theory, a level of protection. But the reality to that, if I was sending, let's say, Philip, you were my client, hopefully we'd have a conversation first, and then I'd send you the bill electronically so you knew it was coming, as a way to try and provide that mechanism. But I agree with you, but I think we're pushing against the way of the world that, due to efficiencies, a lot of that that wave is already taken over.
David Simpkin.
Thank you. Hi, Mark. I was scammed twice earlier this year on my credit card. At this stage, I've been reimbursed, but have been disappointed in the apparent lack of interest in advising how it happened. I wanted to know, was there something that I could do to stop the problem again? But the bank just told me a lot of ways that it could happen, but wasn't able to tell me how it happened in both cases. Somebody has obviously got my credit card number, but I don't know who, and they don't seem to be too interested in following up individual cases. They just, as I found out, they just put the charge against the retailer.
You got the phone?
Yeah, you're spot on. The retailer in the middle is the one who ultimately gets conned because they've lost the good potentially, and they've also lost a potential sale. So the retailer in the middle essentially wears that level of cyber risk. I'm glad I'm not in retail because that threat is only going to be of a magnitude that's just going to keep escalating. I think you're right that the banks won't give you any advice because they're not advice givers, and they deliberately will not be seen as saying this is what happened, because then they're basically saying here's what happened, and if they're wrong, if there's a vulnerability, you can go back to them in a general sense. So you told me this, that turns out to be not right. So the banks have erred on the side of caution and basically avoid giving any form of advice whatsoever because the risk is so great for them, particularly when we're talking about the business style before and libel and how well that works. The banks are just so scared of the negative publicity because that hits the share market and various things go on. So unfortunately, just the way the banks operate, they'll probably never go back to a system of personal banking. They'll never go back to a system where they'll actually tell you what's going on, because the easiest thing to them is they just claw it straight back out of whatever retailer, and then they move on and leave the retailer high and dry. But there's PayWave and there's PayPal, and there's a whole lot of, I suppose, credit-based type transactions that are moving away from the banks because the cyber risk is deemed to be better. But there's a mechanism there that still has to go in the industry, I think.
Yeah. As a person that used to be in retail, the two businesses that were scammed were relatively small businesses, I understand, and I just feel for them that it's unfair. To be in business, they've got to accept phone and online bookings, but they've got no way of checking it.
Yeah. So they've got to choose their provider carefully, and depending on the fees that you pay, some of those mechanisms are better, depending on how they do it. And then there's a whole realm for those types of businesses of how they can protect themselves to verify the transaction. But if you're doing things in a commodity sense, they generally take the efficiency route versus the check and recheck route, which creates the vulnerability. And then it's just a sum of numbers in the middle, which is most unfortunate. But as long as, I suppose, if we slow down those transactions, add a level of detail and accuracy, then the risk diminishes for them. But depends which level of, if they're high value, low transaction, they can do it. If they're low value, high transaction, they have to play an efficiency game, and it's just inherent that they accept the level of risk, which is unfortunate.
Thanks.
Kirsten.
Yes, with ransomware, the importance of having backups that are offline. Do insurance companies sort of help their clients think through that and check, in fact, that it happens?
There's probably a couple of parts of that question. Yeah. They'll almost always ask you a question, do you have a backup system? And they'll almost always ask you, is your backup in the cloud, offline, somewhere else, so to speak? So it's not just backed up on a box right beside here. So the insurers are interested in the timing of the backup on the presumption that you are backing up some way, some form. The level of testing and threat associated with the backup is rarely tested until it's needed, and then that's where the vulnerability comes from. it's much harder for the insurers to try and implement a testing regime. So they'll ask you the generic question, do you test it? How often? But even though you say, yes, we do it, yes, it's in the cloud, or yes, it's over here, yes, it's not in the office, it's a totally different type system, they'll rarely go to that level that you're really edging towards of how reliable is the backup system, and can you reboot from that system effectively from day one without the need of a loss of data. So the testing regime at the end of that versus the question set at the start are two different realms. The insurers they just don't have the level of manpower sophistication to help you test it. It's just an assumption that they ask, are you doing it? And they recommend that you do it. But then it comes back to the vulnerability of we have to go and test and retest ourselves.
And do you sort of work with like data recovery or sort of disaster planning? Do the big companies perhaps
Yep.
part of the conversation is what disaster planning is in place?
100%. So they'll always ask you if you have a business continuity plan or a disaster recovery or a crisis management plan. They all end up being the same thing. They'll generally ask that question, but the devil in the detail of what's actually in the plan and how effective the plan is, that's part of the testing regime that insurers do. So I could write a one-page disaster recovery plan, but it won't be any good. Or I can have a 30-page document that says, if this happens, then we do this. If this happens, here's the threat, and it maps it all out. That level of where people are in the spectrum of a one-page versus 30-page versus systems, a lot of that testing regime in behind it, the insurers don't really go into. It's more a recommendation that a lot of the businesses go and do that automatically and have their own IT parties in behind it, help them with all of that. But first and foremost, yes, you must have a business continuity plan. If the worst case happen, call it what you will, crisis, etc. They all equal the same thing, but you will definitely be asked that question to make sure that you at least have a disaster recovery mechanism or approach or a theory around what you're going to do if the worst case happens.
Thank you.
Do the insurance companies have people that would, I've got a very big business with a big turnover and I want to take out cyber insurance. Do they come along and look at my system and sort of give me some sort of advice on how to protect it?
Some do, some don't. And we're getting into the devil in the detail. So one particular insurer that I'll mention, they're called CFC. They're based out of London. They're the biggest cyber insurer in the world. What they do is they have a 24/7 helpline for you. And they'll also, relative to your domains, they'll actually scan if it was Mark O'Reilly Proprietary Limited, they'll put me as a client into their database and they'll continually scan the threats on the dark web regarding Mark O'Reilly Proprietary Limited. So a lot of that work happens in the background for some insurers. A more commodity-based insurer generally will not do that. So the threat level sits somewhere in the middle, depending on the level of cover that you're willing to purchase. So when I mentioned there's a group called Emergence in the personal space, they've also got a very good product relative to the business space. So I'll go CFC, Emergence, then another group called Chubb Insurance, very big Australian and American firm. They'd probably, we'd rank them about number 3. But then there's some ones down the bottom and there's some options that you've got to choose that if the devil in the detail, if you don't know and you don't add those options in, what you think is a good product ends up not being so. So you're right to raise that, Peter. The level of threat, do the insurers behind the scenes scan for you? I know of one insurer that does, called CFC. A lot of them don't.
My other question is, I hope everyone's got their house insured and their contents, and I've got a rough idea on how to insure my house and what I should insure it for. But if I wanted, just at a personal level, just for little old Mum and I, take out cyber insurance, you're a broker and you sort of said it can be a bit complicated, the application process. If I came to you and said I want to take out cyber insurance, do you go through it with me and explain what I should insure and what I should do?
If I answer that in 2 parts, the short answer is yes, because a broker is obliged to do that. So if you go direct, you find something online, So take AAMI as an example, or UE or Budget Direct. They're very much online insurers these days. You as the consumer go and purchase the product you want direct, you're getting no advice. If you go to a broker, whether you're spending $5,000, $1 million or $100, the broker by legislation is obliged to give you a set of advice. The level of advice that you're going to get depending on what you want, that if you're buying something for $100, the level of advice of, let's say, my time, as an example, you're not going to get a lot of my time to give you a lot of advice, because the economic value of you purchasing that $100 of product is just not there. So there has to be a level of efficiency. So it all comes down to a scale. So what we try and do in the cyberspace, if I bring that back, we've written a lot of papers about cyber. We've created differentials of this product versus that product. Here's the key gaps. And then we tell our people, then it makes it easier for our people to go and give the advice that here's the dual product, here's the emergence product, here's the Chubb product, here's the ARG product, here's the key differences, read the exclusions, off we go. And then that saves us a whole heap of time, but it still meets our legislative requirement of giving the advice. It ultimately comes down to you as the consumer have got to read and understand what's being sent you, and then you always come back and ask questions. If you just accept it, then we're deemed to have met our obligation. So even if you're buying home insurance via us, you're deemed to have read the policy wording that we sent you. You're deemed to have understood what that means. You've deemed to insure it for its full value because you're determining that figure yourself. So there's a whole lot of mechanisms in behind that, that in the personal insurance space, we try to help a lot of clients, but it ends up being a sense of commodity with the advice based on how much you're willing to pay. And if someone's paying $100, you're not going to get a lot of advice.
There you go, Claude. Oh, you've lost it again. You were screen sharing there for a moment, so I just thought I'd let you know. If the insurance companies are getting lots of claims where people have been scammed just a couple of $1,000s, but it looks like a common scam, do they report it to the police and try and get tracked backwards to find out where this is coming from?
Yes, they do. And the police aren't necessarily the body to report it. There's a number of federal government bodies. I think it's that OIAC, the office, I'll get the acronym wrong, but basically they're there to protect Australians relative to cyber breaches. So anytime there's a breach, those guys are going to be basically advised. If it's a big company, there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of processes to go through and do it. But basically, if you call the police and say, I've been scammed, they'll just go, so what? It's not our game. We're not going to investigate it. There's other bodies that the government have in place federally to help with that. And whilst all of this, the police state jurisdictions have cyber crimes, they'll get a multitude of $100, $200, $500 claims. But purely back to a resourcing scenario, if it's a big issue or it's a big business that's been hacked and it's in the millions, there's obviously an interest to go and solve that. But a lot of it, unfortunately, goes undetected, unadvised, and the very small stuff often doesn't even get reported. We, as an industry, would rather it be more reported, creates more awareness, and therefore reduces the exposure.
I think you mentioned before that a lot of people get scammed out of $150 and they just write it off and as being something foolish they did. But that's happening to thousands of people across Australia. So it's, I'm not saying that's right, but it's very widespread, but no one reports it because it's, you know, not a great amount of money for each individual.
Well, you're spot on. And I deliberately didn't want to bore you with a whole heap of stats, but by the time you put all of that money together, it's already in the billions. And it's not just 1 billion, it's multiple billions of exposure every single year. And the OAIC, Office of Australian Information Commissioner, and the Australian Cyber Security Centre, they track all of this data and they release a number of stats every single year about different scams and the value of those scams. So anyone who's interested, the Office of Australian Information Commissioners, who has ultimate responsibility for reporting and capturing and therefore developing that federal and state policing as a robust way to try and prevent it. But by their own words, the level of magnitude when we start getting back to that curve that I can turn on a computer today and I can become a hacker today and I can turn the computer off and then we move on. So the threat or vulnerability is just so great that it's really difficult for even policing to try and control that, and therefore they're almost reliant on an awareness campaign, and therefore the likes of Defender and McAfee and Kaspersky to continue to try and keep up to protect a vulnerable consumer.
I think we have an organisation called Scam Watch too that
Yes.
you can report scams to.
Spot on. Yep. Yeah. So if you're familiar with ScamWatch, even if you're not sure of an email, you type it into ScamWatch and it'll tell you if the email is genuine or not. And that's a great way just to try and protect yourself. That if you're more familiar with ScamWatch, it's a really easy system to use, and the level of vulnerability that they just protect people because everything gets reported into ScamWatch and they say, this happened, look for this, watch for this. So you just type it in and you see the scam and you go, great, no problem. That's fantastic. Great system.
Are you aware of how much of this goes on and you know, how many people are vulnerable or have fallen for the trap, like someone earlier said they'd been scammed or caught twice?
It comes back to my point. I can go and find that I suppose data that is produced by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. We can circulate that round at a later point, but it's definitely in the billions of dollars every year and growing. We get updates fairly regularly of the statistics, but the insurers only tell us a tiny portion because it's like the earlier comment, it's sub 5% that even buy the insurance. So therefore the insurance data is just not robust enough. You need a whole of industry data, and that's where that federal data comes in. And we get access to that fairly frequently, and that's what I talk about, those exposures in the billions.
I'm sure I'm not Robinson Crusoe, the number of phone calls I get about all these sorts of things. And because there's so many of them, they must be catching some people. I just wonder how it happens.
Drop in the ocean would be the short scenario. You've got to be a pretty dumb cyber criminal to be caught, but maybe that's my own view. I'll keep my own views out of it. The level of sophistication that Kirsten was talking about earlier and the breadth of that increasing exponentially, it's only, I suppose, the tip of the iceberg that people get caught, and there's a whole lot of work done federally as well as internationally to try and pick up on the bigger syndicates that are doing it.
Okay, has anyone else got any questions? Speak up or raise your hand. George Scarbeck?
I would just like to compliment Mark on an excellent presentation and very, very good, clear answers to the questions. Well done, Mark.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it. The whole mission of these things is to inform and educate versus trying to talk about the boring world that I live in. So glad I could help.
Ron Brooks, have you got a question? No. Okay. No one else? Okay.
That was a clapping sound.
Thank you very much, Mark. I've learned quite a lot. I'm a bit touchy about all these things. I've never been scammed, touch wood, but I've had a lot of people. I think there was one gentleman rang me up one day. He said, I don't know whether he said it was Microsoft, and I started to ask him questions about software, not that I know much, and we had quite a discussion, and in the end I just said, oh look, you know, this is a scam, and hung up. And I felt like ringing his boss up and complimenting him because he rang me back and he said, sir, you have got a serious problem and you hung up on me. And he went to the bother of ringing me back, and I give him full marks for effort there.
Yeah.
But just the other day I went online and ordered something and I got an acknowledgement, and the next day in my spam folder was a thing to say, you know, you can track your order, and it certainly wasn't from the company that it was coming from. And I thought, I wonder how many people would say, oh, yes, I'll track my order, and there it is. But look, thanks very much, Mark. As I say, I've learnt a lot. I'll try and be a bit more cautious. Now, regretfully, because we're on Zoom, early last year, I bought some very expensive wine, and I looked at the bottle that I was going to give you tonight, and it says it expires on the 10th of October this year. And regretfully, because of the lockdown, and that's not one of the reasons to leave home, the best I can do is tell you that my wife and I will drink it on Saturday night. And if you care to ring me, I'll tell you how much I enjoyed it. But thank you very much for your talk, and much appreciated on behalf of all of us.
Well done. Thanks, guys.
So now, ladies and gentlemen at home, we're going to have some gentle music, Ain't Misbehaving, and Blue Danube, and that's going to take, say, 5 minutes. So if you want to go and get yourself a cup of tea or a drink or, you know, anything else, off you go, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Very much for that slight interlude. I wasn't here all the time. I didn't notice anyone up dancing, but maybe where everyone's out having a cup of tea. There's still a few missing, so we'll wait a minute or two, although we've had our 5-minute break. But well, we've waited an extra minute, so we'll continue on. So I'd next like to welcome our President, David Stoney Gibson, with his monthly report. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Peter. And I've even remembered to unmute my microphone. Okay, this is the last regular monthly meeting before our AGM next month. The notices have gone out for, oh, what's that say? The notices have gone out for now the meeting, the AGM next month is going to be held all online. We decided not to even try for in-person because we have no idea what the situation is going to be in a month's time. And it would be far too hard to change course. Even if we were free to attend in person in a month's time, it would just be too hard to change course at this stage. The notice went out recently from the Secretary as an all-member email. That includes a link to the proxy forms, but I've included that in the message box. If you look at in the chat, if you look at that at the bottom of your screen, there's a link to the proxy forms. The nominations for committee closed at 3 p.m. today, so that's all settled. You should have had a notice about that at the same time, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think. So I just want to bring up a couple of unusual things that are going to be in the AGM this time, which you may choose to vote on. One is we've got a proposed change to the rules, article number 2, I think it is. It's a small wording change where we move the emphasis away from computers and a little bit more towards technology in general. It simply reflects what we're doing in practice, which is trying to broaden the scope of the club to be more attractive to a younger demographic. Just computers on their own is very, very yesterday these days, and the interest these days lies in things like 3D printing and electronics and microcontrollers and so on. So I urge you to vote in favour of that. It actually changes nothing in reality, but it's just recognising the slow evolution that's taking place. The other one, which is maybe a little more painful, is that we've decided we need to increase the membership dues by a small amount. Some may think that during COVID we've been saving money. In fact, it's been costing us more this year, so we're back behind the 8 ball by about $22,000 this financial year, or the one that's just ended. Membership fee income declined by 47,000 over the last 3 years. There's been no raffles, of course, because we can't have raffles in cyberspace on Zoom, or we haven't been doing them on Zoom. And some of the costs have gone up as well. The people we rent the printer from, big printer in the office, they actually increased the fees in the middle of last year, despite the usage being almost zero. And we're stuck with that printer until about this time next year. So that's one of the costs. All that said, the committee are actively looking for cost reductions as well, which will take a bit of time to come in. Rob Brown has been researching alternative internet providers for Moorabbin. We certainly will get rid of the big printer as soon as we can, or just buy it off the supplier for $1 or something like that. So although it's a bit painful, the increases are fairly minimal. And so I do urge you to please vote in favour of those increases. That's another interesting and rather important snippet here is that we received an email from Microsoft a few days ago, basically in code saying, hey guys, we're about to start clamping down and enforcing the rules of your subscriptions and not-for-profit services and stuff. And while I confess I don't fully understand the technical ramifications of it myself, I'm told by people who do know, like Harry and Hugh, that it actually fully justifies our preemptive move away from Microsoft before the axe falls on us. So that really backs up the move that we're doing there, back over to Google. And finally, if there's anyone there who out there of your members who have some ability, skills that you can lend to iHelp, it would be a great thing. There is a sort of slow, gradual erosion of people out of iHelp. One major important member resigned recently. So iHelp can use all the iHelp they can get. It may only be a couple of hours a week or something like that. But even if you have specialist skills, that could help as well. So it's an important service that we provide for members, but it is provided by volunteers. So if you have the ability, please report to iHelp at melbpc.org.au. And that's about it for me. Thank you very much. Over to Peter.
Thanks very much, David. That's what everyone likes, something brief. If I can just put my 2 bobs worth in.
Is that brief and pointless, you were going to say?
I wouldn't say that to the President. Graham Neal, you've got your hand up. Have you got a question for the President?
Yeah, a quick question to David. Could you just explain the procedure for proxy voting? I had a look at the proxy form a few weeks ago, and from memory, it required you to nominate your proxy, but also the membership number of your proxy. Is that necessary?
No, if you look here, I looked at that this afternoon, Graham, and if you look carefully, it says if you don't nominate a proxy on your behalf, then it just falls on the chairman of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Any other questions of the President? No, everyone's quite happy, but okay. Thanks, David. So I'd just like to give Kirsten would like to spend a few moments to say a few words to you. So if you're there, Kirsten, over to you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's been I've put I'll paste the Yammer link in. So we have a kind of a live page in Yammer, which I'll paste into chat, about a couple of things I thought I'd like to mention, because I was worried that with the cybersecurity would be kind of too worrying in a way. It certainly got me worried. So I put some happy links in. There's neighbourday.org, the City of Melbourne book clubs. A lot of the community centres are running kind of free courses and so on for people in COVID to actually participate in things. I know there's online singing groups. I haven't tried any. There's U3A. There's also the people that talked last month have a big conference coming up, and Gardening Australia's Half Man, Half Hedge Costa will be there. So that's a short spiel. I'm looking like I'll step back a bit next year, still be involved with the meetings, but not so much relied on to organise the speakers. So looking for people that would like to join in getting things organised. And there was a couple of other things I wanted to mention. I'll just grab my notes. I joined this Patreon group called Decoding the Gurus, and they like ran a once a month Ask Me Anything type thing, and they used a thing called Crowdcast, which and that the way they'd get people to talk was to actually kind of get people. It would only have a certain number of, I think it was 4 people in the room, so you'd be kind of a fly on the wall of a group of 4 until it was your turn, and someone would step down, and then be another 4 people chatting or so on. So I'm asking everyone to put their thinking caps on how to interact with Zoom, because it's or other than Zoom technologies, because I think the whole world's exploring how things work now. Like maybe university lectures don't have to be 2 hours of people just watching someone talking. And I thought we had a great experiment tonight when we started using the put your hands up in Zoom, but we had Peter calling out who would speak next. So I'm really interested if anyone's got any thoughts right now on how to kind of orchestrate and do things, because community is a thing, but they actually there's a lot of thought and ideas going into how to make online communities work. So over to you guys.
Thanks, Kirsten. Sadly, that's Kirsten's monthly plea for help. She assures me that she will answer every email she gets from you offering to help next year. It's one of these things that she's done a great job for a couple of years, and she's looking for some assistance next year. I daren't say that it's only sort of half an hour a month that she puts into this, because when you find out that there's a bit more to it than that, you might go be a bit upset with me telling you that. But I'm sure if anyone's willing to put the time in, it's not that onerous, and I've quite enjoyed working with Kirsten. I'm sorry to see you go, but I'm happy to work with someone else that offers to take the job on. So now it's time for me to introduce our iHelp man, which is Bert Ellis, and he's going to have a bit of a talk, but he's there to solve all your computer problems that any of you may have. And so over to you, Bert. He's there, I hope.
Maybe he's muted.
I'm not sure he's around.
I can see him in chat, but maybe he's waiting for his turn. Just gone off for a couple of minutes.
You might have to.
There's a thing called unconference. I wondered if anyone had heard of unconferences and had ideas of whether we should give one a go.
What's unconference?
An unconference is dreamt up. I haven't got the spiel in front of me, but it's where people put ideas about what to talk about at the beginning of the meeting, and then they sort of sort it into groups, and then they split off into groups to chat about the different topics. So it's sort of like an unplanned conference. I'll search for the link while when Bert arrives. Yeah.
Are you there, Bert?
So I've just checked, and Bert is muted and no video. So if you look at the participants and check for him, he's just seems to be.
Yeah, I can. He's there. He was there earlier, and he's muted, but and he's got his camera off, but he's obviously still having a cup of tea. He was there earlier.
I don't have his number. Can anyone text him?
Yeah, I've got it. I'll chase it up.
Bert's on his way.
Thanks, Harry.
Can't seem to get the image up though. You there?
Yes, we can hear you, Bert. So maybe
Yeah, I don't know why I can't get the image up.
well, if you maybe if you like to talk for a few moments while you're trying to sort that out, or would you
okay.
like?
Think I got it.
There
Okay,
you
sorry
go.
about that. I
Over to you.
Looked at the schedule, and I still have got another 5 minutes before I was supposed to be on. But anyway, maybe I mistimed it. Okay. That was a very interesting talk from that gentleman. It's made me really frightened. I wonder what sort of insurance I got, whether it's going to be any good anyway. Anyway, all right. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm very sorry for being late. I thought I was timing it right. Anyway, just a few things I'd just like to say about our iHelp group. We had a meeting since the last MelbPC meeting. We had an iHelp meeting, and as quite a few are aware, one of our main members of our iHelp group was Leighton West, who decided to do a sudden disappearing act. And so anyway, we had to reorganize a few things. So we've done that. As a result of that, some of the things that were changed was Leighton had set up quite a few things for our group. Fairly independently, he decided quite often what we needed and would go ahead with it. So one of them was Pure Chat, and I'm not sure if you're all familiar with it, but Pure Chat was a chat line. I don't know why they call it chat. You have to type everything in. So I think we had probably about 10 chat requests over a period of many, well, I was going to say years, but it wasn't quite that long, but certainly over a couple of years. It was very rarely used, and it had a lot of issues with it. So anyway, as a result of that, Leighton, who was still keen to keep it, even though it was very difficult and we didn't get a lot of use out of it, we decided to close that after discussions with other people within the organisation. One of the other apps, I believe Leighton introduced it, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with it, is a phone system that we use for callers to be able to ring in and with their problems, and basically that's the main function of our iHelp group, to answer these calls. And in many ways 3CX is an excellent system. However, it's got quite a lot of bugs in it, and if it wasn't for those bugs, it would be an absolutely perfect system. For those that perhaps aren't familiar with it, it basically, as far as our group's concerned, it allows us to redirect calls to ourselves whenever we're on roster to answer the calls. So rather than, say all having to go to a particular phone or whatever, we can have it sent to our mobile phones or our computers. So it works in a great way, because people looking for support just dial one number, and then during the hours of which we attend it, which is 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Quite often it's a little bit longer, but certainly during those hours, they'll get one of our iHelp members to help them with their problem. So 3CX is, as I said, is quite an excellent system, if it wasn't for some of the bugs. And we actually used it for our meeting, in the same way that using Zoom now, we had about, I think it was 10 of our members of our iHelp group conducting a meeting over equivalent to Zoom, but on 3CX, and it worked quite well, although over the years when we've been trying it, we had a lot of issues with it. So it's finally, I think, come to work quite well. Anyway, that's 3CX, and we'll continue to use that part of one of Leighton's initiations. Just mention a couple of our members who had some issues, just some that are more interesting than others. We have quite a few interesting ones. We had one lady, I won't mention names, it's not fair, but in some cases it's very good, but I won't mention their name. But an elderly lady who had Zoom problems. Her computer was fairly basic in its setup. It was about 3 years old, but wasn't over designed. She had minimum hardware. She only had 4 gigabytes of RAM, and she had a lot of trouble going to Zoom meetings herself. There were a few other meetings that she attended to on Zoom, and she said she had a lot of problems, dropouts, images would disappear, disconnections. So I was on iHelp the day that she had called in. So I connected to her computer using a quick assist, and I checked out her internet connection, and I thought that was probably it, and because she said that she only had ADSL. She didn't even know whether it was ADSL 2 Plus or the original old ADSL, but I imagine everything's ADSL 2 Plus now. But anyway, so I thought I'd test out the speed of a connection, and I was very surprised because it was virtually as good as I've got with can't think of the word. Anyway, with ADSL, she was getting 50 megabits per second download, and about 6 megabits per second upload. So it's quite reasonable. It shouldn't have been the problem. So I then checked her startup programs because I had a look through Quick Assist. I was looking at her, I can't think of words at the moment, I don't know why, through Task Manager. And she was running at about 80% of her gigabyte usage, of her RAM usage. So basically there shouldn't have been anything running at the time I was talking to her, except for Quick Assist, obviously. So I checked to see what was on her startup menu, and she had a whole load of things that didn't need to start up. So we went through and stopped a lot of those, and then rebooted and reconnected with Quick Assist, and it brought it down to about 43%, I think it was. So that freed up a lot of the RAM that you might have needed as well for Zoom. So that was as far as I could check it. She said that, I said, well, we could try, just using Zoom to talk to each other. And she said, oh, I should already try that even before I'd made all the changes. And it always worked fine with a one-to-one. So tended to indicate she had to have a group before things started to play up. So I had to leave it with her to then try. Later on, someone suggested that she should, and I also spoke to her about it, increase the RAM. But she was quoted, I can't understand this, she was quoted $150 from some of the reports that we write up. I saw that she was quoted $150 to bring the 4 gigabyte of RAM up to 8 gigabyte. So I don't know how many slots she had. Maybe she had to actually buy a whole 8 gigabyte of RAM, but even so, at 150, I didn't think it was that dear. So, but maybe it is. One of the things we found with Quick Assist is there were a lot of emails going backwards and forwards on it, that it's not to access Quick Assist on Windows 10 on different computers, not always the same. Different computers seem to have a different location of Quick Assist, and make it quite hard sometimes for our members to connect themselves to Quick Assist when we're trying to connect to them. There's basically the most consistent way was to use the search function on Windows 10 and just start typing Quick Assist. And invariably, as soon as you start typing the first Q in, one of the immediate options is Quick Assist. But sometimes even that's hard to find for some of our members. So I think we even brought that up on Yammer. I don't know what sort of answers we got on that one, but yeah, I'm interested to know if anyone knows one definite way of getting to Quick Assist for some of our customers who we're trying to help. Another issue we found very interesting was one of our members had decided to simplify his computer requirements. He had very basic requirements for his computer, and he asked us about Chromebooks. Again, I don't know how many people are familiar with Chromebooks, but in my case, my granddaughters are using it at school, primary school. I was amazed that they were at that level already, but they seem to be very good. They run on Android system, and basically all the apps that work on phones, on Android phones, will work on the Chromebooks. I don't know how many people are familiar with Chromebooks, but Chromebooks are basically really a tablet, but quite often with a keyboard connected to it as well. And they don't run DVDs or are able to connect to many things. They usually only have one type C USB, and that's used for everything, for charging it, for everything else. So they're a bit limited, but anyway, it would seem that probably a Chromebook would be suitable for him, except that he used Thunderbird, and it looked like he would have had to have an interface between the Chromebook and Thunderbird to get Thunderbird to work. But I'm surprised because Firefox seems to run very well on Chromebook, and seeing as Thunderbird is another one of their products, I would have thought that should have been fairly straightforward. Don't know if we've had any questions or suggestions so far. If anyone, I can't see many images at the moment, so I'll have to change the view, see how many people we've got, and whether yeah, we've got many people who want to ask a question or say anything at this stage.
Bert, can I
Yes.
pick up on the very last thing you said?
Yes, Harry.
As you probably know, I put up in Yammer on the very issue about the software they can run on a Chromebook.
Yes.
I've been pretty confused when I've done some web searches for that member. If you go back far enough, I think it was just basically a Chrome browser and nothing else. But that's about 2011. Anyway, what was said in Yammer was this would apply both to Firefox and to Thunderbird. Those will be the Android versions. In other words, the native operating system, which is of course one flavor of, well, it's Chromos, it's Chromium, it's called, isn't it? Or Chromos. It is another Linux flavor, but according to what was posted by, I think it was Greg Eden, who seems to be our main Chromebook enthusiast, those will not be, no, it was actually Roger Brown who said it, wasn't it? Will not be the same thing as you get on your computer, even in Linux. There'll be Android versions. Now I'm wondering if anyone in the meeting can either correct that or support it. Do we have any Chrome buffs in this meeting who didn't perhaps pick it up in Yammer? Well, Richard has his hand up, I think, but he's muted. Now he isn't muted.
Yes, I have actually got a couple of Chromebooks, and they are very useful. As you say, they run Chromos as the operating system, which basically supports the Chrome web browser. I don't try and load too many other applications on it, but if you want to use something basic for handling Gmail and doing any web browsing, I don't think you could use anything that be simpler. Of course, unlike the tablet, they've got a good keyboard on.
Yeah, okay.
And the little kids like the Chromebook keyboards because something you wouldn't really notice, all the letters are lowercase. For some reason, children like keyboards with lowercase letters.
Well, didn't notice.
Another one from a bit left field in that inquiry was about the amount of random access memory you need. And one of our team actually phoned Centacom because he wasn't familiar with the hardware at all. And he was told you need 16 gigabytes. And I had looked on the web and saw a few models, about 8 of them recommended by some review, and only one of them went up to that. But I had a guess as to why that might be, Richard. Namely, that browsers are rather voracious of RAM, aren't they? And basically, it's not a storage device, it's a real-time web client, isn't it? Does that sound right?
I think Google's intention there is if you want to do word processing and so on and so forth, you use the cloud storage.
Yeah.
So rather than so that's one of the things about it. You rely on having good internet connection, and most of the stuff you use cloud, and of course the Google Office suite, which works with cloud storage.
Yeah, right, sure.
Okay.
Processing like code with another machine. So basic web browsing, emails, you couldn't be better off. Perfect for the maiden aunt that doesn't want to worry about software updates and all that business. They start up very quickly, turn them on, and they're ready to use in seconds rather than minutes. Windows 10 machines.
Right. Okay. I don't know if anyone else had anything to add to our discussion so far. I only see a limited number of people, so if someone puts their hand up, unless I'm on the right page, I won't see them. Alan, I can see you.
Yes, totally different subject, but I wonder if I can get some advice. I've just bought a new laptop and it comes with a demo version of Norton antivirus on it. If I choose that I don't want that, apart from not paying the money, and I want to use the Microsoft Defender, what actions do I need to take to switch over to Defender?
As far as I know, the only thing you need to do is uninstall it, but you'll have a lot of fun uninstalling it. I tried that on one of our members in the same position. She found that it kept interfering and slowing down a lot of things, and we turned it off, which you can do, and immediately the speed at which she was able to do things on a computer immediately jumped up. But when we tried to get rid of it, it was a nightmare. They still hide things, and it just you go and uninstall how you would normally do, and it doesn't. It just won't uninstall. Cedric, sorry, unmute.
See if I can get it off. Yeah. The first time I've watched a monthly meeting, normally had another one. Most antivirus, you need to use their own uninstaller rather than the Windows uninstaller. And I think I don't know if I've ever done Norton, but I've done uninstalling of a number of other things, and certainly the Windows uninstaller seems to struggle of most antivirus products.
Yeah, we actually use the Norton anti uninstaller, but it kept saying, do you really want to uninstall? And we'd go, yes, because I was, again, hooked up to her computer using Quick Assist, and we'd go, yes, and it then just kept looping around and just wouldn't uninstall. It just wouldn't do it. I'm trying to remember how we managed to basically stop it, but not really uninstall it. I don't know if that always happens or whether we were doing it wrong. Yes, Rob, thanks.
Could you boot into safe mode and uninstall it in that situation?
Possibly. The difficulty was being on Quick Assist and trying to get into safe mode was going to be tricky. And I think you're right. That's what we ended up doing. We managed to get rid of it in part, and then we found out by Googling a question that she had to do part of it on safe mode. And basically I left her with the instructions on doing it, but I don't know if her ability was going to be that great, but we at least stopped it anyway. Sorry.
I have also found out that their help desk seemed to me rather more competent than most help desks that I've ever spoken to. When I had a friend of mine who's a very extremely basic sort of user, he's got Norton on his machine, and we were trying to sort out how to do it. The only trouble is beware, because there are other people, there are hackers out there who try to hijack, put up phone numbers that take you to the wrong place. So the main problem is beware contacting Norton, that you actually get onto Norton. But once you've done that, I've found it was an Indian one from memory, but a competent Indian operator.
Yeah. I don't know why anyone uses any other antivirusware. I just use the Windows one that's already there, and make sure that I don't use anything else. I rely on the fact from, our previous speaker, that he said, Microsoft, guard this pretty strongly. They wouldn't want anyone complaining about it. So, so far so good. And I don't know if someone could tell me why I should use something else. I'd stand corrected.
Yeah, well, that was my approach, but sounds like it might be easier for me to pay Norton than to go through all the hassle of trying to get rid of it.
I don't think so. I think there are ways. It's just that it's a lot harder if someone's connected to your computer through Quick Assist or something, and then trying to do it that way. But yeah.
Anyway, thanks for the discussion.
Yeah, okay.
I think probably that the fact that Norton can't be uninstalled by remote access is a tick from Norton, isn't it?
Could be.
A bit of social engineering. Oh yes, sir, you have to let me come in and help you to sort out your computer. Click,
yes.
click, and your protection's gone.
Yeah, probably that could have been a contributing factor, David. And, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I use nothing but Windows Defender, and I sort of take the approach that I don't know if it's the best or not, but I'm also reasonably alert to all the possible scams and things anyhow. So if I'm going to download a new program, I'll scan it in the computer before I install it, that sort of thing. And I've been caught up once clicking on an email that I shouldn't have clicked on, I think, ages ago. So, yeah.
Bert, Richard Bradford's got his hand up. I don't know whether he has a question or a comment. Richard?
The comment, I'm not sure if it's tied up with a recent version of Thunderbird that downloaded, but the other day I sent out an email using Thunderbird, a list of people in the BCC, and they all showed up on the received email. So for some reason the line card probably didn't blank out the recipients. So just warn people to watch out for that if they're using Thunderbird with the group email, and try to hide the recipients.
Bert, it's 2 minutes past 9, and my apologies that you weren't available. I was ready, and my wife complains about me that when I'm ready, everyone's got to be ready. And I didn't look at the timetable, and you were probably looking at it, but I was ready, so I expected you to be ready, but my apologies.
No,
but,
I actually had set my time to be back here by 8:30, and I don't know what happened. Somehow I was wrong. Anyway,
not to worry. But look, we might conclude the meeting there, and I gather you'll still be there, and the link will still be open for anyone that wishes to talk to Bert or amongst themselves. But thank you everyone for attending. We thank the speaker. Thank you for David and Bert for their assistance. Our next meeting, which will be the annual meeting, of course, is November the 3rd, the first Wednesday, which will, as David said, be on Zoom. Whether we'll be physically able to meet in December, who knows? But thank you all for your attendance, and this will conclude the meeting formally, and good night, everyone.